Well, here we are again. Uh, First of all, welcome to this second series on wisdom literature. And it's a great privilege to be able to do that for you at the North Star Mennonite Church. So, this is the second of a series of three presentations. This one deals with the book of Proverbs. And here we are. So, in this presentation, we'll do a survey of the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is about the secret of success. And in order to understand its basic agenda, it is very helpful to ask yourself what you want out of life and what you think you need to have in order to be happy. You see a whole series here of benefits that people are looking for. And so that's the question, right? So in this lecture, we will look at the book of Proverbs and see that it is designed to do at least a couple of things. First of all, entice the reader to consider entering into the house of wisdom. And then, as we have time, provide also, the book is designed to provide the basic elements of a biblical worldview. Now, we all have an idealized picture of ourselves. This is why a lot of people read their horoscope. And everyone is proud of whatever sign they are. And you know why? Because it describes them to a T. So, for example, I'm a Pisces. I was born March 17th, and see what it says about me. So the Pisces zodiac signs and meanings deal with acquiring vast amounts of knowledge. But you would never know it, right? They keep an extremely low profile compared to others in the zodiac. They're honest, unselfish, trustworthy, and often have quiet dispositions. The Pisces is often the victor of ill circumstance because of his or her intense determination. They become passionately devoted to a cause, particularly if they're championing for friends or family. Well, that's me, right? But it's just a trick. You see, each sign description is designed to flatter the person who identifies with that sign. It's designed to sucker us in by playing on our positive and often unrealistic perception of ourselves. It's a little bit like looking in the mirror in the morning. Every morning you look in the mirror and you can't help but winking at yourself. You still look good, you tell yourself. And then one day, the horror, you see a picture of yourself that someone else took, say at the Christmas party, and it takes a few seconds to realize that the paunchy middle-aged guy is actually you. Spiritually, it's the same story. C.S. Lewis puts it this way. We imply and often believe that habitual vices are exceptional single acts and make the opposite mistake about our virtues, like the bad tennis player who calls his normal form his, quote, bad days and mistakes his rare successes for his normal. I do not think it is our fault that we can't tell the real truth about ourselves. The persistent, lifelong inner murmur of spite, jealousy, prurience, greed, and self-complacence simply will not go into words. But the important thing is that we should not mistake our inevitably limited utterances for a full account of the worst that is inside. The book of James, the one New Testament wisdom book, says something very similar in James chapter 1, verses 23 to 25. A big part of the agenda in the wisdom books is to shatter the illusions we entertain about ourselves, because you see, as long as we do not have an accurate perception of who we really are, we will not reach outside of us to get help or even to grasp at life. So, in my first lecture, I stated that the most fundamental objective of wisdom literature is to persuade men and women, especially youth, to choose the way of life and veer away from the way of death. That, ladies and gentlemen, forgive me, is easier said than done. Every person is a mad mix of self-delusion, pride, self-centeredness, suspicion of God, and so forth. It's not to say that human nature is all bad. Not quite. We're made in the image of God and have the ability to express that image in wonderful ways, but we still remain a mixed bag. Sin is an integral part of who we are. It affects our body and our soul. It is sin, with a capital S, that makes it so difficult for us to turn to God and accept His rule in our lives. Wisdom teachers have their work cut out for them. Let me try to outline how the book of Proverbs goes about this task. First step is to get the people into the house of wisdom, if you will allow me to use this metaphor. In the book of Proverbs, Lady Wisdom is portrayed as being in the street and shouting invitations to those walking by. Every day, so to speak, she goes fishing, and she uses every possible lure to attract attention to her, to wisdom. I sometimes go fishing with my brother, but I have to admit that I'm not a very good fisherman. For one thing, I don't like to touch the fish unless it's a trout, then I don't mind. My brother does that. I don't like to get the hook out of their mouths. My brother does that. He's also equipped. He has a special plier for that. So I usually start with one lure and stick with it no matter what. I have a high level of commitment to my lures, not my brother. He puts one on, he casts a few times, and if there's no result, he tries another one, right? Lady Wisdom is like my brother. She casts with one type of lure, and then another, and then another. Now here's a sampling of the lures used in the book of Proverbs. So I'm not going to go through these. I'm just going to mention them. If you want to study them on your own a little bit later on, you certainly can do that. Well, wisdom, for example, often highlights the benefits of embracing wisdom. What is there for me if I embrace biblical wisdom? Well, there's all kinds of stuff, right? Knowledge. You can get a good reputation, a peaceful, productive life, even physical health, peace of heart. That's quite a lot of people feel anxiety these days because of the COVID issue. Wisdom promises peace of heart to those who embrace her. Success, prosperity, even money. There's also counter lures, right? So this is what's going to happen if you don't embrace wisdom. You may become poor, you may have a bad reputation, and you may also suffer a loss of character, inner corruption. It takes wisdom to remain people of integrity. If you don't have it, well, you get the opposite. Family ties. So in some cases, you have proverbs that portray a mother who pleads with her child. And in some verses, you also have an explanation, a portrayal of the negative impact of bad choices on loved ones. We also have examples of good living. So we do the same thing when we invite an athlete, for example. There's a movement, I think it's called an organization called Athletes for Christ, and often these men and women get invited to speak to young people who admire them, right? And in some cases, we invite people who have faced extraordinary challenges and who still have remained faithful to their commitment to Jesus Christ. So those people, because of their fame sometimes, or because of what they've experienced, can have an incredible impact on people, particularly young people. In some cases, none of these strategies will work, so the wisdom teacher will at times resort to humor and ridicule. Nobody wants to look stupid, and so if there's some way to avoid the appearance of being stupid by embracing wisdom, well, that's a good reason for some. Now, the reason why the book of Proverbs uses all of these strategies is because we're all unique and extremely complex individuals. You see, what makes me tick will be different from what makes someone else tick. What will grab my attention will differ from what will grab the attention of somebody else. For some people, money is of very little interest. For some, personal fitness, right? Personal health is the most compelling motivation in their lives. For others, it's success and work. For some, it may be love and so forth. So the ultimate purpose of the wisdom teachers is to win people over. They go fishing, and the hope is that whatever lure is used will be noticed and swallowed by somebody. And when that happens, they reel them in, throw them in the boat, and then bring them into the house of wisdom. So 3 things happen when you get into the house of wisdom. I often tell my students that the more complex an issue is, the clearer their basic premises need to be. It's when the sea gets rough that you need to have a good anchor. So say you want to discuss medical ethics. I remind them, begin with clear premises. What are your premises, right? If you want to discuss the fate of the unborn, which is a huge issue, probably the seminal issue of our time, begin with clear premises, right? If you want to discuss sexual morality, another huge issue these days, you have to begin with clear premises. Now, they say we live in postmodern times. They say, for example, that there are no meta-narratives anymore. This is an idea that came from France, by the way. French philosophers are not always to be trusted. I can say it. But see, the problem with the times in which we live, that we call postmodern, is that we no longer know how to think from clear premises. As my former colleague, Tim Geddard from the MB Seminary in Fresno once said in a lecture, he said postmodern thought is basically confused thought. The renowned philosopher Alvin Plantinga, in a delightful article published on postmodern thought, adds that it is formally self-contradictory. It's the snake eating its own tail. And the reason for that is because, you see, postmodern thinkers like to say that there are no longer any absolutes. Well, how can you say there are no absolutes? Because this, in and of itself, is an absolute statement. But a lot of people don't think that far. They just take it like a motto, a slogan, and for them it becomes reality. All right. So the most important premise is this one. So as soon as the quote-unquote fish is in the house, this is the first thing that they will see all lit up in neon lights. The fear of the Lord, right? The fear of the Lord is the most important premise to gain, to integrate, to adopt, to embrace in our lives. So I'm just going to read this quickly. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, David's son, king of Israel. Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. Their purpose is to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives, to help them do what is right, just, and fair. These proverbs will give insight to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the young. Let the wise listen to these proverbs and become even wiser. Let those with understanding receive guidance by exploring the meaning in these proverbs and parables, the words of the wise and their riddles. And here we are. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge. But fools despise wisdom and discipline. This is the simplest and yet one of the most profound statements found in Scripture. It has implications for the philosopher, the mathematician, the engineer, the factory worker. It is most readily understood by little children and people who have the heart of a child. And these are concepts that both Jesus and Paul refer to in Matthew 18:3 as well as 1 Corinthians 1:27. So once you've got the basic premise in place, you become then subjected to two simultaneous processes as you continue your journey in the house of wisdom. Wisdom seeks to teach the reader how to think. I'll say more about that in a few minutes. Wisdom seeks to furnish our ideological world with the pieces needed to articulate a biblical worldview, a way to think about God, ourselves, and the universe that accurately reflects ultimate reality. What Proverbs and the rest of the Bible offer in this respect is special revelation. It's the kind of knowledge that you cannot get from any other source. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, the Bible is indeed, and I have said it for over 40 years, and I will continue to say it, the Bible is the most important book ever to see the light of day, because it provides us with a conduit, a window on ultimate reality, a reality to which we have no access. Empirically, the only access we have to that particular reality is through that revelation. Before I go on, let me ask you let me put on the table a puzzling number. That number is 158 to 750. You're probably wondering, what is this number? 750. Now, these are older numbers. I didn't take the time to review them, but the proportion remains about the same. But 750 is the total number of Nobel Prizes awarded from 1901 to 2006. 158 is the number of Nobel Prizes awarded to French Canadians in that same period. Some of you may question that, and I would, because as far as I know, French Canadians, at least from Quebec, haven't earned a single Nobel Prize. So who is that people group that receives so many Nobel Prizes? Well, I'm going to tell you, it's Jewish people. That is an incredible ratio. Jewish people have received over, and that's only up to 2006, the proportion remains the same after that, over 21% of all Nobel Prizes. And that is in every major field of research. That is economics, medicine, literature, chemistry, physics, and so forth. At some level, it is bizarre. And you have to ask, why is it that way? Now, I'm not sure, but I think, that's my hypothesis, I think it ultimately has something to do with the fact that they were the first to receive a book, a revelation that gave them a window on the real nature of reality and the very mind of God. And what I can say with a high degree of confidence at this point is, when a culture receives that revelation, when a culture looks through that window, extraordinary things happen. And if you want to read more about that, there's a Rodney Stark, a sociologist, a historian, has written some very interesting stuff about that. But this is what happens when a culture is exposed to that special revelation. Scientific endeavors take a giant leap forward. We put man on the moon. We discover the building blocks of the human cell. We invent little gizmos that jumpstart your heart should it happen to quit. We take care of our most vulnerable, and so forth and so on. It's not that, that culture will become perfect. There's no such a thing as perfection, utopia with, fallen human beings. But there are certain things that happen in a culture when they are exposed to the biblical worldview. Talking about the book of Proverbs, one of the things that bugs me a little bit about that book is the fact that it's not very well organized. It doesn't have a table of contents. There is no index. The material is not organized according to clear categories. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we should have a whole chapter on money matters, right? It's very important for young people, particularly, to become competent in with finances, right? So many of them know nothing. They don't know what debts do, and they don't understand what a mortgage is. And so, anyways, it's a big issue, right? So I think there should be at least one chapter on money issues, another chapter on relationships, because I mean we have most of us have great difficulties with relationships. Another chapter on raising children. No, that would have been too simple. A few years ago, I was asked to provide the material needed to create an adult Sunday school curriculum based on the book of Proverbs. And I have to tell you, I had a lot of fun. I mean, I know that's been done before, but I did it myself, right? I studied the book of Proverbs in its entirety, and I reorganized the book. And this is what it looks like, right? I've got all these lessons there, all organized according to theme, right? How do you get them to listen? Wisdom and folly, lifestyles, the word we say, family relationships, and so on and so forth. I had, like I said, I had a lot of fun doing that. And frankly, I do believe there is value to reorganizing the material for this kind of purpose. But we got to keep that in mind. God didn't give us the book of Proverbs in the way I reorganized it. And so I'm one of those who likes to give God and Scripture the benefit of the doubt, even when I don't understand it. And so I figured God must have had a good reason for doing this. And so let's see what it might have been. And here, if I was in person, I would get you to try to discuss this issue and see if you can come up with a hypothesis. But seeing we're not, I am going to give you my own hypothesis at this point. Now, one of the major problems we face today is our tendency to think about complex issues in very simplistic ways. And though I don't deal with the book of Job in this series, it's in great part why the book of Job was written. I have an article on that if you're interested. You see, the problem with us here in 2021 is that we don't think empirically anymore. At least a lot of people don't think empirically. We don't ask if a particular theory has had or is having good results and outcomes. We don't test our theories, particularly in the social fields. We have narratives, right? And whatever the particular narrative is on whatever issue you're looking at must be accepted without discussion. This is at the very opposite end of what critical thinking is supposed to be. Now, the book of Proverbs is designed to help the reader develop a kind of holistic way of thinking. One could speak of a multidimensional way of reasoning that automatically and consciously looks at issues from a variety of perspectives. If you have assimilated the book of Proverbs and the way it leads its reader into how to think, what happens is after a while, no matter what the issue might be, you don't just swallow it. You ask questions. You ask, what is the evidence? Has this been tested? And so on and so forth. And just to do a quick exercise here from Proverbs 10:13 to 17, Lady Wisdom has used the bait of prosperity here. And now has the fish, so to speak, flopping on the floor of the boat. Now the fish is sent to the house of wisdom, right? So the bait is money. The fish has bit on the bait, and now the fish has been captured, so to speak. And once the fish is captured, it's sent to the house of wisdom to learn about how money is viewed within the larger wisdom framework, right? It's not just that Lady Wisdom promises wealth. There's a whole context, there's a whole backstory to this wealth that Lady Wisdom is promising. But here's the bait, right? The wealth of the rich is their fortified city, but poverty is the ruin of the poor, right? I love it. It's a great motto, right? Somebody could write that on his walls, could have a little sign on his desk, could post it on his ceiling, and could just memorize it, and that could become his or her life motto. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city, but poverty is the ruin of the poor. Now, this is a maxim that a lot of people could embrace, right? It could become your rule in life, it could become your battle cry, and so on. But what does it mean, right? I mean, to a lot of you out there, I suspect this doesn't quite feel kosher. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city, but poverty is the ruin of the poor, right? So what does it mean? Can we really affirm this as a life slogan? Well, in order to understand what's going on, you need to slow down a little bit, right? And you're probably asking, what is he talking about? Get out of McDonald's. Yeah, I'm talking about the McDonald's restaurant, right? And it's fast food, it's very convenient, and so forth. But here's the thing. In order to understand the wisdom books, including the book of Proverbs, you have to slow down a little bit, right? Pedagogical strategies that worked quite well, I am sure, for ancient Israelites don't work so well for us because of the way we read. We're fast food readers. In fact, more and more people don't read anymore. They just watch YouTube videos. We don't like to read long articles or books. It's got to be short. It's got to be to the point. It's got to be simple. In fact, for some people, it's gotten so bad that when they read a tweet, they get exhausted. You can't read the book of Proverbs the way you eat a Big Mac at McDonald's. You can't just wolf it down. If you do that, if you rush through the wisdom books, particularly the book of Proverbs, you're not going to understand what is going on in the book of Proverbs. Reading Proverbs requires you take your time. It's like going to a French restaurant. If you're going to go to a real French restaurant, let me warn you ahead of time, it's going to cost you a pile of money. You're going to have to give a big tip, and you won't get much food to show for it, right? So if you're going to go to a French restaurant, take your time. Those little 3 potatoes that are there, they're going to cost you a fortune. So you better appreciate each bite that you take and eat really, really slowly. The reason why the book of Proverbs is organized the way it is to allow for the principle of multiple contexts to come into play when considering a particular issue. It's always best to think about a given issue in the context of other related issues. You can't just look, say, at climate change, for example, from one issue. You also have to look at the costs of the measures that some people suggest. It's like the COVID thing, right? Lockdown seems to be a kind of a magical tool for some government officials, but what these government officials never or hardly ever say is what is the cost of these lockdowns, not just economically, but in terms of depression, in terms of attempted suicides, in terms of mental health generally, bankruptcies, people losing their jobs. Those metrics are never listed along with the COVID statistics, right? We don't look at the cost. When you look at an issue, it is absolutely essential that you look at the particular issue that concerns you in the light of other related issues as well. So what do we learn about money, right? When the verse is read, the particular verse I read for you, when it is read within the immediate context in which it is located. So if you look at verse 13, right? Wisdom is found on the lips of the discerning, but a rod is for the back of him who lacks judgment. Wise men Wise women, right, store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Now here's that verse. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city, but poverty is the ruin of the poor. We get the impression that the only important thing in life is to have enough money to, to face any challenge that may come our way. But it's not true, right? Verse 15 is preceded by verses 13 and 14, which speaks about discernment and wisdom and so forth. And it's followed by verse 16. The wages of the righteous bring them life, but the income of the wicked brings them punishment. He who heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. So the issue is not simply to find ways to make as much money as possible, whether it's ethical or not. The issue is to find a way to accumulate enough wealth to live comfortably, also to face, the challenges of life and so forth, but within a broader context, ethical context, moral context. So I'm not going to take the time to do a detailed analysis of this passage. You certainly can do it. But here's the conclusion you could come to from reading that verse in the light of what precedes and what follows. So you could say, for example, you can conclude wealth is good, right? It's not that money is bad in and of itself, right? It's the root of money. But wealth is good and appropriate within the framework of wisdom, justice, and self-discipline. If you accumulate your wealth by cheating or through illegal activities, then it's no longer accumulation of wealth. It's no longer wealth in a way that biblical wisdom affirms it. Now, I'm going to say a few words about the biblical worldview that we find in the book of Proverbs. This is just a primer. It's just to get you going. Once you've seen this video, you'll be able to to research and read the book of Proverbs with a view to determining what does it teach about God, what does it teach about ourselves and the universe in which we live. So what do we lean? What does the book of Proverbs teach us about, the big things of life? Well, the most important premise, and I've said that at the beginning, is the fear of the Lord. A second one, which is really important, but I'm not going to develop here, is the affirmation of human life. We live in a day and an age where human life is devalued almost systematically, almost everywhere you look at. But within a biblical worldview, human life is to be most valued because it is given by God and it is affirmed by God. Also, the book of Proverbs teaches us to reject determinism. God has given us the ability to determine the kind of person we will be, right? We're not predetermined by our genes, our parents, or environment. We have the ability to make choices that will determine the kind of person I will become, and also as a community, the kind of society that we will build. We're not predetermined to go anywhere. We can make choices. This is something that the book of Proverbs teaches us. We have the ability to make choices. We have freedom. So in some senses, in some respects, and that is based on Genesis 1-3, our destiny is in our hands. And then finally, to refer to a great French scholar, Pierre, bet on what he calls the 3-pound brain, bet on human beings. There are two basic impulses when it comes to our view of what human beings are worth. In most cultures throughout history, human beings have been seen in some fashion as liabilities or as assets. Now, how a culture really views human nature is revealed in times of crisis or perceived crisis. Cultures that do not have an adequate framework will view human beings as the cause of the crisis and will call them China's one-child policy is a very good example of that. But cultures that have a biblical framework to assess human nature will view them as assets, right? And this is already highlighted in neon light in Genesis 1:27 to 29, right? The whole notion of the image of God in humanity. So cultures that adopt the first options always decline, right? Cultures that basically view human beings as liabilities in a simply materialistic way, they decline. Cultures that adopt the second option and live in a way that is consistent with it will thrive. So, the question is, what is the most precious commodity on earth? Now here I'm gonna read you an excerpt, and we're getting to the end here. I'm gonna read you an excerpt from atheist Michael Shermer's book, How We Believe, Science, Skepticism, and the Search for God. This is what he says about human beings, okay? And he says basically the same thing in another book that he wrote, Why Darwin Matters, the Case Against Intelligent Design. Now, read what he says. It's very interesting. Not only are human beings storytelling animals, we're also pattern-seeking animals. And there is a tendency to find patterns even where none exist. To most of us, the patterns of the universe indicate design. For countless millennia, we have taken these patterns and constructed stories about how our cosmos was designed for us. For the past few centuries, however, science has presented us with a viable alternative in which we are but one among tens of millions of species, housed on but one planet among many orbiting in an ordinary solar system, itself one among possibly billions of solar systems in an ordinary galaxy located in a cluster of galaxies not so different from billions of other galaxy clusters, themselves whirling away from one another in an expanding cosmic bubble that very possibly is only one among a near infinite number of bubble universes. Is it really possible that this entire cosmological multiverse was designed and exists for one tiny subgroup of a single species on one planet in a lone galaxy in that solitary bubble universe? That's a rhetorical question, you understand, and the obvious answer for this individual is obviously no. How can we have any transcendent significance? It makes absolutely no sense. It is absurd. Well, let me tell you something. This fellow, Michael Shermer, is not the first one to ask that question. That question was asked a long time ago by the psalmist. And we find it in Psalm 8. And here I quote verses 3 to 9. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals that you care for them, right? The expected answer should be, well, nothing. Well, nothing. We're insignificant, right? This is what ancient Mesopotamians, even ancient Egyptians believed about human beings. They're insignificant. Only the gods matter, and perhaps the king. Here's the answer of the psalmist. Yet you have made them a little lower than God, and crowned them with glory and honor. You've given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen and the beast of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. So when asking the question, what is the most precious commodity on earth? If you ask atheists, secularists, materialists, they will say, it's not humans for sure. It's something else. But if you ask the psalmist, if you ask the biblical writers, if you ask the special revelation that God gave us, the answer is we, human beings, are the most valuable, the most precious, quote unquote, commodity in the universe. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. The third session will address the book of Ecclesiastes.